The early morning silence in Silver Hollow was broken by the soft shuffle of feet across the creaky floorboards. Clara Mercer stood in the kitchen, eyes cast down as she worked, her scarred hands moving with practiced precision. Her sister Violet, cocooned in layers of silk sheets, was still lost in dreams of the life she'd never earned. Clara, on the other hand, had earned nothing but heartache. Her face, marred by fire and sacrifice, was all that remained from the day she pulled Violet from the flames, losing everything she once was in the process. But today was different. Today, the wealthiest rancher in Wyoming was coming to town. All eyes were on Violet, the beautiful one, the one everyone expected Nathan Blackwood to choose. Yet when he walked into the church, his eyes didn't linger on Violet's golden hair or perfect smile. They found Clara, the woman no one wanted, the woman who had spent years in the shadows, invisible to everyone but the person who had chosen her. Why had Nathan Blackwood chosen Clara? Clara awoke before the first light of dawn, the house as still as the cold that seeped into the walls. Violet's soft breathing floated from the other side of the room, where her sister slept in the good bed, the one with the mattress that didn't press springs into her back like Clara's own. The silence stretched on until Clara's fingers moved automatically through the tasks she knew by heart. The stove was lit, the coffee started, the biscuits baked just right. The smell of bacon filled the air as she set to work, preparing a breakfast she could not remember ever enjoying herself. Her stepmother's voice broke through the quiet like a whip. "Clara, the blue dress needs mending before church. Violet tore the hem last night." Her voice was as cold as the winter outside, and Clara didn't need to look up to know the contempt in Mrs. Mercer's eyes as they fell on the scar that ran up Clara's neck. "And don't forget your place in the back pew today." Clara bit back the bitterness that threatened to rise. She said nothing. There was no need to. Mrs. Mercer had made it clear, year after year, that Clara was a mere shadow in this house, a servant to the more beautiful, more beloved Violet. She pulled out her needle and thread and got to work. This was her life now, mending dresses, cooking, cleaning, staying in the background. It had been this way for 17 years. Clara had once dreamed of a different life, but after the fire, after everything was taken from her, dreams had no place in her world. Resentment had no place either, because resentment required hope, and Clara had long stopped hoping. When the dress was done, she hung it on Violet's door and returned to the kitchen. By the time her sister appeared, radiant even in her nightgown, breakfast was ready. "Isn't it wonderful?" Violet's voice was light, high with excitement, her blue eyes sparkling. "Nathan Blackwood is coming to church today." "Everyone says he's looking for a wife." Violet twirled in a circle, her golden hair floating around her. "Imagine living in that big house, having servants, never having to worry about money again. I'll bet he chooses me, Clara. I just know it." Clara didn't look up from her coffee cup. She felt the weight of her sister's words pressed down on her like a stone. She could see it. The perfect picture. Nathan Blackwood, handsome, rich, powerful, the most eligible bachelor in the territory. He would choose Violet, as everyone expected. He would never choose Clara, the girl who had saved her sister's life, but was left with nothing in return. "It sounds nice," Clara said softly. "I'm sure you're right." Violet's smile was wide, bright, unbothered by anything but her own image in the mirror. "Of course I'm right." She grabbed a biscuit from Clara's plate. "I've always known he would pick me. Who else would he choose?" Clara stared into her coffee, watching the steam curl up and fade into the air. She didn't need to answer. She had known the answer long before today. The church bells rang at 10, and Clara followed her family down the street, 3 steps behind, as usual. She wore her brown wool dress, plain, unadorned, while Violet floated ahead in a gown that shimmered in the morning light. Mrs. Mercer led the way, head high, smile practiced, the very image of grace and dignity. Clara stayed in the background, just as she always did. Inside the church, Clara found her place in the back pew. The whispers followed her. Poor thing, such a shame about her face. She was pretty once, before the fire. At least the younger one turned out well. Clara held her head steady, keeping her eyes forward, keeping her chin level. She had learned long ago that showing pain only invited more of it. Then, the doors of the church opened. The man they'd all been waiting for walked in. Nathan Blackwood. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair sprinkled with touches of gray. Nathan looked like a man who had seen the world in ways few others had. His black coat, dusted with snow, billowed behind him as he moved through the doors. The entire congregation seemed to hold their breath. Every eye turned to him, but Clara knew they weren't looking at her. They were looking at Violet. Nathan took a seat near the front, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. He sat alone. The whispers grew louder, buzzing in the air around Clara. That's when he looked up, his eyes scanning the room, finding Clara among the crowd. Their gazes met, and for a moment, the world stopped. Then, without a word, Nathan Blackwood stood and walked toward her. The air in the church seemed to thicken as Nathan Blackwood walked toward her. Every step he took felt like an eternity, the murmurs of the crowd fading into nothing. Clara could feel the weight of every eye on her, but she couldn't look away from him. His face was unreadable, his eyes dark but steady, as though he had already made up his mind long before the moment arrived. When he reached her, he didn't hesitate. He tipped his hat, his gaze holding hers. "Miss Mercer, would you do me the honor of a moment of your time?" His voice was low, smooth, and somehow it felt like a command. Clara felt the blood drain from her face, her pulse quickening. Every instinct screamed for her to stay in the shadows, to remain where she belonged, invisible. But Nathan Blackwood was waiting, and for the first time in her life, someone saw her. The church was silent, the cold outside pressing against the walls as Clara stood, her legs unsteady. She stepped forward, feeling every whisper like a lash against her skin. They parted for her as she made her way past the pews, her sister's eyes wide with disbelief, her mother's face twisted with fury. Nathan didn't flinch. He simply stood, waiting for her. Clara's breath caught in her throat. What was happening? Why her? Why now? He led her out into the churchyard, where the snow was falling gently, dusting the congregation's shoulders and hats. It was colder here, but the chill in the air couldn't match the frost in Clara's veins. "Mr. Blackwood," Clara said, her voice trembling, barely above a whisper. "Please, call me Nathan," he replied. His smile was brief but genuine, and Clara felt an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her. He wasn't the monster she had imagined, not the distant, unreachable figure everyone spoke of with awe. He was just a man, one who, for reasons Clara couldn't understand, had chosen to walk a different path, a path that led him to her. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the crowd's gaze still pressing in. But when Nathan spoke again, his words were not for the audience around them. He spoke to her, his voice quieter now, just between them. "I know this must be unexpected," Nathan said, his eyes scanning the churchyard, as though looking for answers in the people who whispered behind his back. "But I wanted to make sure you know that this is no mistake. I've seen the way you carry yourself, the way you work, the way you take care of things." He paused, glancing at her scarred neck, his gaze not filled with pity, but something else, understanding perhaps. "You're stronger than anyone else here, Miss Mercer. I believe that, and that's why I've chosen you." Clara could hardly breathe, her mind racing. He had chosen her, the girl who had never been anything more than a servant in her own home, the girl who had always lived in her sister's shadow. "Why?" Clara asked, her voice barely audible. "Why me, Nathan? Why not Violet?" His gaze softened, and for the first time Clara saw something in his eyes that wasn't just cold calculation. There was pain there, something deep and raw, but also a hint of something else, something Clara couldn't quite name. "Because Violet isn't what I need," Nathan said quietly. "I don't need beauty or grace. I need someone who understands the weight of life, who knows what it means to fight for survival. Violet may be everything this town desires, but she's not what I'm looking for." His eyes met hers, and there was no turning away from the depth of his gaze. "You're more than I expected, Clara, and that's why I've chosen you." Clara's heart hammered in her chest, her thoughts whirling. He wasn't asking her to marry him out of some twisted sense of charity or pity. He was offering her a future, one she hadn't dared to dream of. But could she accept it? Could she accept him, when her entire life had been built around the idea that she wasn't worthy of anything more than being a shadow? The church bells rang again, a reminder of the passing time. Nathan stood before her, his hand outstretched, waiting for her response. Clara opened her mouth to speak, but before she could form the words, her stepmother's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Clara, you can't possibly." Mrs. Mercer's voice cracked with fury, but Nathan's voice, calm and firm, interrupted her. "This isn't a conversation for anyone but me and Clara," Nathan said, his voice leaving no room for argument. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze around them. Clara's mind was a blur, her emotions a tempest inside her chest. This wasn't what she had expected. She had never imagined someone like Nathan Blackwood would ever choose her. But here he was, a man who had seen beyond her scars, beyond her quiet existence, and recognized something in her worth fighting for. Clara took a breath, the weight of the moment settling over her. She couldn't speak for a moment, her throat tight. "I accept," she finally whispered, her voice shaky but certain. Nathan's expression softened, and for the first time, Clara saw the man beneath the hardened exterior. The man who had chosen her, not because she was beautiful or desirable in the eyes of others, but because he believed in her strength. "Then we'll have dinner this evening," Nathan said, his voice steady again. "We'll discuss the details and we'll go from there." Clara nodded, still in shock, but a strange warmth had started to spread through her chest. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was the beginning of something. Something new. Something real. And for the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't invisible anymore. As they parted ways, Clara's steps felt lighter than they had in years. The whispers of the crowd had faded, replaced by a quiet hope she hadn't felt in far too long. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time, she was walking it with her head held high. And that, she realized, was more than she had ever dared to ask for. The evening stretched long, colder than it had been in days, as Clara prepared herself for the dinner with Nathan Blackwood. Her heart pounded in her chest, a relentless reminder that this day was far from ordinary. She had accepted his offer, his unexpected proposal. Yet, the reality of it hadn't truly settled in until now. She stood before the mirror, her reflection fractured by the scar that ran down her neck, the physical mark of a past she couldn't escape. Clara had spent years hiding her scars from the world, turning her back to mirrors, always ensuring no one saw the damage she carried with her. Now they were exposed. Nathan would see them tonight, but would he still see her? Her hands shook slightly as she smoothed the wool dress that had been her mother's. It wasn't much. Simple, plain, but it was all she had. And for once, it felt like enough. The fabric, though worn, was warm, a comforting reminder that she had made it this far. She had survived, hadn't she? There was a soft knock at the door, and before Clara could answer, it creaked open. Mary, the housekeeper, stood in the doorway, her face kind but firm. "You look well, Mrs. Blackwood," Mary said, her voice gentle. "I'll have a fire going in your room. It's a bit cold tonight." Clara nodded, though the fire in her chest was more than enough to keep her warm for now. "Thank you, Mary," she replied softly. Mary hesitated before speaking again. "You're doing well, Clara, don't doubt that." Clara smiled faintly, appreciating the older woman's kindness. She was used to being invisible, to being ignored. But tonight, something was different. Nathan had chosen her. And somehow, despite the weight of her past, that felt like more than enough. When Clara arrived at the dining room, Nathan was already seated at the head of the table, his black coat discarded, and his sleeves rolled up slightly, as though he'd been working before dinner. The flicker of the candles cast soft shadows on his sharp features, and for the first time, Clara saw him not as the distant, powerful figure everyone had made him out to be, but as a man, one with his own burdens, his own scars. He stood as she entered, his gaze meeting hers with a quiet respect. "Please, sit," Nathan said, gesturing toward the seat beside him. "I had a feeling you'd wear something simple. It suits you." Clara's heart skipped a beat. No one had ever said anything like that to her. She wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a polite statement, but she couldn't help the small flutter of something warm inside her. "Thank you," she replied, settling into the chair across from him. Dinner was simple: a hearty roast, vegetables from the garden, bread fresh from the oven. But the conversation was sparse, each word carefully measured, as though both of them were treading lightly in unfamiliar territory. Nathan's voice, when he spoke, was calm, measured, like he was considering every syllable before letting it leave his lips. "So," Nathan said after a long pause, his gaze settling on her with an intensity that made Clara's breath catch. "I'm curious. What was it like, growing up in Silver Hollow?" Clara glanced down at her hands, picking at the edge of the napkin on her lap. Her memories of the town were mostly cold, lonely, filled with whispers and judgments. She had never been enough for anyone, not her mother, not her stepmother, not even her sister. But Nathan's question was genuine, a simple inquiry that made her heart ache with the truth she had buried for so long. "It was lonely," she said, her voice quiet. "Silver Hollow is a small town, and when you're not what people expect, it feels like everyone is watching, waiting for you to fail." She paused, glancing up to find Nathan watching her with something like understanding in his eyes. "And your family?" he asked gently, his voice softening. Clara's chest tightened at the mention of her family, the ones who had never really been family. She swallowed hard, pushing the lump in her throat down. "My father died when I was young, and my mother, well, she wasn't much of a mother. She left, and my stepmother, she didn't want me. She wanted Violet. And for years I stayed in the background, did what was expected, kept my head down." Nathan nodded slowly, his jaw tightening slightly. "That sounds difficult," he murmured. Clara smiled bitterly. The memories of the years spent in silence, mending others, mistakes while hiding her own, threatening to overwhelm her. "It was," she said simply. The rest of dinner passed in a quiet, tension-filled rhythm, the fire crackling in the hearth as they ate, both of them lost in thoughts too heavy to speak aloud. Clara could feel the weight of his gaze on her, the occasional glance, the moments when their eyes met and lingered for a second longer than necessary. It was as though he was trying to understand her, trying to piece together a story she had never shared with anyone. When dinner was finished, Nathan stood and gestured toward the door. "I should get back to the study, but I'd like to speak to you again, Clara, soon." Clara stood as well, feeling the cold air rush in from the hallway. "Of course, Nathan," she said quietly. "Thank you for dinner." His lips twitched slightly, as though he were holding back something. "You're welcome. I'll see you tomorrow." Quote. Clara nodded and watched him leave, her heart racing in her chest. It was a strange thing, this life she was walking into, a life she had never asked for, but that now seemed to stretch before her, waiting to be claimed. As she made her way back to her room, Clara's thoughts whirled. She had said yes. She had agreed to this strange arrangement, this business proposal, disguised as a marriage. And yet, for the first time in years, she felt something more than just survival. She felt seen. She felt heard. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start a new life. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, her heart still pounded with uncertainty. What would tomorrow bring? What did Nathan Blackwood truly want from her? Would this marriage really be just a partnership of convenience? Or would it become something more? The days after their dinner passed with a quiet tension that Clara couldn't shake. Nathan was always around, at the ranch, in the study, by the fire, but there was a distance between them, something unspoken that neither of them dared to breach. Clara's mind was a whirlwind, her heart a battle between disbelief and an emotion she hadn't felt in so long. Hope. She hadn't expected this. Nathan's attention, his quiet understanding, his offer. What did he want from her? Was it truly just a business arrangement, as he had said? Or was there something more to this marriage, something deeper she wasn't yet ready to face? She had spent so many years being overlooked, being the invisible sister, the one who stayed out of the way, who did what was asked without ever being asked for more. Now, suddenly, Nathan Blackwood, a man of power, of wealth, and of a past that haunted him, was choosing her. Choosing her for reasons she couldn't yet fully understand. But she was trying. She was trying to see this as a fresh start, to view their marriage as an opportunity to find something for herself, even if it wasn't the kind of love she had dreamed of. As the days went by, Clara settled into a rhythm at Blackwood Ranch. The tasks were familiar: cooking, managing the household, reviewing accounts. She had become an expert at running a house, at keeping everything in order. The difference now was the space she had, the room to breathe without the constant demands of her stepmother or Violet. The house was large, cold, but there was warmth here too, a warmth that, for the first time, felt like it had nothing to do with survival. One evening, a week after their dinner, Clara found herself in the library, the quiet ticking of the clock filling the otherwise still room. She had been going over the ranch's ledgers, correcting a few mistakes she had found in the books. It was a task she relished, one that made her feel capable, even powerful in her own right. As she wrote, her thoughts wandered back to Nathan. His presence, though always there, was as elusive as the winter light. He was distant, always polite, always respectful. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper lingered beneath the surface. Something he wasn't willing to share. Footsteps approached, and she looked up just as Nathan entered the room. He had shed his coat, his sleeves rolled up, revealing the strong, calloused arms that spoke of years of hard work. His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, comfortable yet filled with unspoken words. "You're busy," Nathan said, his voice quiet, but there was a hint of something else in it, something softer. "I didn't mean to disturb you." Clara smiled faintly, a little surprised at the warmth in his voice. "It's fine. I was just finishing up." He nodded, his gaze lingering on the papers in front of her. "You've been working hard. I admire that." Clara's heart skipped a beat. No one had ever admired her for what she could do. Most had only seen her for her scars, her plainness. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet. She paused for a moment before speaking again. "What about you? How do you spend your days?" Nathan hesitated, as if weighing the question carefully. "I manage the ranch, the cattle, the land, the employees. But there's not much joy in it," he admitted, sitting down in the chair beside her. "It's work, necessary work, but that's all it is." Clara noticed the weariness in his eyes, the same kind of exhaustion that had been present in her own life for so long. Work had always been her constant companion, but it wasn't supposed to feel like a burden. "Does it ever get easier?" she asked softly, her gaze drifting to the fire burning in the hearth. Nathan's eyes softened, his voice quieter now. "It does when you have someone to share it with," he said, his tone almost hopeful. Clara looked at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his words. Nathan Blackwood, the man who had built walls around his heart, was speaking with a truth she hadn't expected. "I don't know if I'm the right person for that," Clara replied quietly, her fingers running over the edge of the papers in front of her. "I'm just here, trying to make sense of all of this." Nathan's eyes met hers, and there was something in his gaze. A quiet understanding, a shared recognition of the struggles they both carried. "I didn't choose you because I thought you'd be perfect," he said. "I chose you because I believe we can build something together, something real." Clara felt the weight of his words settle over her like a blanket. It was more than she had ever expected from him. More than she had ever expected from anyone. "And what if I don't know how to build anything?" she asked, her voice trembling with the weight of her own uncertainty. "What if I'm not strong enough to do this?" Quote. Nathan leaned forward, his elbows resting on the armrests of the chair, his gaze never leaving hers. "You're stronger than you think, Clara. I've seen that in you. You've spent your life surviving, haven't you? You've survived more than most people could ever understand. You don't have to build something from scratch. You just have to let it grow." His words hit her like a wave crashing against the shore. Clara had spent so long living in the shadows, so long holding herself back, that the idea of letting something grow, something real, something for herself, felt impossible. But for the first time, Clara wondered if it might be possible. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to hide in the shadows forever. Clara stood, feeling the weight of the moment, the gravity of his words pulling her forward. "I'll try," she said softly, her voice full of the uncertainty she had carried with her for so long. "I'll try." Nathan smiled, and this time, it wasn't just polite. It was genuine. "I believe in you," he said, standing as well. "And I'm here, every step of the way." Clara felt something shift inside her, something that had been dormant for years, something that had been buried beneath the ashes of her past. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was trust. It was the beginning of something new. The fire in the hearth crackled as Clara made her way toward the door, Nathan following closely behind her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she was ready to face it. Not as the invisible sister, not as the scarred girl hiding in the shadows, but as Clara Blackwood, the woman who had been chosen, not because of what she lacked, but because of everything she had survived. The days passed in a strange blur of quiet moments and growing tension. The silence between Clara and Nathan was not uncomfortable, but it was filled with the weight of unspoken things. Things neither of them had the courage to say. Clara had never expected this life. She had never expected to be seen, to be chosen. But as the days turned into weeks, she found herself wondering if this quiet understanding, was something more than just survival. Nathan was always present, but always at a distance. He was kind, respectful, even gentle at times, but the walls he had built around his heart were still there, just as solid as the ranch house he had inherited. Clara wasn't sure if he would ever let her inside those walls, but for now, she was content with the space they shared. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something real, something neither of them had ever known before. It was a bitterly cold morning when Clara found herself in the barn, checking on the animals. The world outside was still, blanketed in snow, the harsh winds howling through the trees. She felt the sting of the cold through her coat, but it didn't matter. She had learned to survive in worse conditions. As she checked on a new calf, she heard the sound of boots crunching in the snow outside the barn. Her heart skipped a beat, but she didn't turn around, didn't want to make it obvious that she was waiting for him. Nathan entered the barn quietly, his presence filling the space like a shadow. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Clara glanced up at him, trying to keep her composure. She hadn't been able to shake the feeling that Nathan was always observing, always waiting for something, waiting for her to prove herself, maybe, or maybe waiting for her to walk away. "It's fine," she replied, her voice steady. She gestured toward the calf, just checking on the new arrivals. Nathan nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before he stepped closer, his boots crunching in the snow. There was a quiet tension in the air between them, something neither of them wanted to acknowledge, but both knew was there. "You're good at this," he said softly. "Managing the animals, the house, the ranch. I can't say I didn't notice." Clara's heart skipped again, and she tried to brush it off. It was just praise. Nothing more. But still, it felt like something new, something she wasn't used to. "I've had practice," she replied, her voice soft, almost uncertain. "I've had to take care of things before." Nathan studied her for a moment, his brow furrowing. "You've always been strong," he said quietly. "I think that's why I chose you. You're stronger than most people I've known." Clara felt the weight of his words settle over her like a blanket, heavy and warm. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, to hear praise, to feel seen. But Nathan had chosen her for her strength, and maybe, just maybe, she could learn to believe in it too. "I don't know if I am," Clara murmured, her eyes fixed on the calf. "I've never really thought about it." Nathan took a step closer, and Clara felt the warmth of his presence. She didn't look up, not just yet. She didn't know what to say, how to react. She had spent so many years hiding behind walls, hiding behind her scar, behind her responsibilities. But now, with Nathan standing before her, offering her his words, She didn't know how to respond. "I think you are," Nathan said, his voice soft but firm. "And I think you'll prove that to everyone, including yourself." Clara's breath caught in her chest, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe. The weeks that followed felt like a quiet shift in the air. Clara and Nathan began to find their rhythm, working together on the ranch, managing the household, their conversations growing more frequent, more natural. They didn't speak of love, not yet, but there was something between them, something growing, slowly, steadily. One evening, as they sat in the study together, going over the ranch's finances, Clara couldn't help but notice the way Nathan looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. His gaze lingered on her, not with the detachment he had shown when they first met, but with something else, something deeper, more meaningful. For the first time, Clara felt the shift in their relationship, felt the warmth between them. That wasn't just out of convenience, that wasn't just born from their agreement. It was something more. It was trust. And trust, Clara realized, was something she had never given herself before. The next few days were uneventful, filled with the usual routines of ranch life. But Clara couldn't ignore the quiet moments when Nathan would catch her eye, or the brief, lingering touches that weren't accidental. Each of these moments, small as they were, carried a weight of emotion that neither of them dared to acknowledge aloud. Then, one night, as Clara walked through the hall after finishing her evening chores, she found Nathan waiting for her by the door. He was standing near the window, looking out over the ranch, his hands resting on the sill, as if he was waiting for something. Clara hesitated for a moment before she approached him. "Nathan?" quote. He turned, his dark eyes meeting hers, and for the first time, Clara saw something she hadn't noticed before. A vulnerability, a softness in his expression that he had never shown her before. "I didn't know what I was getting into when I asked you to marry me," Nathan said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "But I'm starting to realize that it's not just about business. It's not just about survival. It's about more than that." Clara felt her heart skip again, and for a moment she wasn't sure if she could speak, if she could find the words to express what was growing inside her, but she had to try. "I know," she said softly. "I'm starting to realize that too." Nathan stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "Clara," he said, his voice low and full of meaning, "I didn't choose you just because you're practical, just because you're strong. I chose you because you're more than that. You're more than I expected." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say, didn't know if she could say anything. But in that moment, she realized something. She didn't have to hide anymore. She didn't have to be afraid. Nathan's hand reached out, touching hers for the first time without hesitation, without a wall between them. "Do you think this could be real?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with the question neither of them had dared to ask before. Clara looked at him, and for the first time she didn't feel like she was just surviving. She felt like she was living, truly living. "I think it could be," she said softly, her voice full of the hope she had buried so long ago. Nathan smiled, a smile that reached his eyes, a smile that Clara hadn't seen before. Not this real, not this genuine. And in that moment, Clara knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The days that followed Nathan's quiet confession felt like a turning point for Clara. She wasn't sure when it happened, when the walls she'd built around herself began to crack. But it was as though the moment Nathan had touched her hand, everything had changed. The air between them no longer felt thick with unspoken tension, but filled with something new, something fragile yet real. Possibility. They worked side by side, managing the ranch, overseeing the cattle, and Clara noticed the small ways Nathan began to trust her more. He would glance at her when they reviewed the accounts, his expression softening as he saw the sharpness in her eyes, the same determination he had seen in himself all those years ago. It wasn't love yet, not in the traditional sense, but it was something honest, something they both could hold on to. And for the first time, Clara realized she wasn't alone anymore. One evening, after a long day of work, Clara was sitting by the fire, her thoughts drifting, when she heard the sound of boots approaching. Nathan stepped into the room, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the firelight. He looked tired, worn from the day's work, but his presence was a quiet comfort to her. "Clara," he said, his voice low but filled with an emotion that was hard to place. "We need to talk." Quote. Her heart skipped a beat, the weight of his words pressing on her. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan moved closer, the air between them heavy with something unspoken. He stood in front of her, his dark eyes locking with hers, and for a moment, everything around them seemed to fade into the background. "I'm not asking for a fairy tale," he said quietly, his gaze unwavering. "But I want you to know something. I didn't choose you because I thought you'd be an easy option. I chose you because you're strong. You're more than I could have ever imagined." Clara's breath caught in her chest. She had heard him speak with respect, with politeness. But this was different. This was vulnerability, raw and real. "And I want to give you more," Nathan continued, his voice thick with something she couldn't place. "Not because you owe me, not because I owe you, but because I believe in us." Clara stood up slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. She had spent so many years afraid of love, afraid that she wasn't worthy of it. But Nathan, this man who had chosen her despite everything, was offering her something more than just a place beside him. "I don't know how to do this," Clara admitted, her voice barely a whisper, her hands shaking as she reached out to him. "I've never known how to love, how to trust." Nathan took her hands in his touch warm, grounding. "You don't have to know how. We'll figure it out together." Clara looked up at him, her heart racing. The uncertainty, the fear that had once held her captive seemed to fade away in the warmth of his gaze. For the first time, she realized something that had been buried deep inside her for years. She wasn't invisible anymore. "I'm scared," Clara admitted, her voice small, but the words felt like a release. "I'm scared of everything, of failing, of not being enough." Nathan's expression softened, his thumb brushing against her knuckles in a gesture so tender it made Clara's breath catch. "You're more than enough. You always have been." Quote. The words were simple, but they struck deep inside her, reaching a place she had kept hidden for so long. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of hope. She had spent so many years hiding from the world, hiding from herself. But now, Nathan was here, offering her something she had never dared to ask for, a future. "I believe in you, Clara," Nathan said, his voice steady, "and I'm not letting you go." Clara took a deep breath, her chest heavy with the weight of everything that had happened, everything she had feared. But now, standing here with Nathan, with the possibility of something real between them, she didn't feel so alone. She didn't feel so invisible. "I'm not going anywhere," Clara whispered, her voice full of quiet strength. "Not this time." Nathan smiled, the first real smile Clara had seen on his face in weeks. It was small, but it was genuine, filled with the promise of something more. And in that moment, Clara realized that she had found something worth fighting for. Not just survival, but a life filled with love, trust, and the kind of partnership she had never known. The days that followed felt different. Clara and Nathan worked together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing moment. They didn't speak of love, but there was something in the way they moved together, something unspoken, that was felt in every shared glance, every quiet moment. But their peace was short-lived. A few days later, as Clara was working in the garden, she heard the sound of horse hooves approaching. Her heart skipped a beat, and she turned, her eyes scanning the horizon. A rider was coming, but this wasn't a usual ranch hand. This was a figure she recognized from the past. A figure who had no place here. Victoria Wells. Clara's stomach turned. The woman who had left Nathan at the altar was back, and she wasn't here for pleasantries. Victoria dismounted with the grace of someone who had always been used to getting what she wanted. She walked toward Clara, her eyes filled with something cold and calculating. "I see you've made yourself comfortable here, Clara," Victoria said, her voice dripping with disdain. "But this life you're living isn't real. Nathan isn't yours. He never was." Clara stood tall, her hands clenched at her sides. "You're wrong, Victoria. Nathan chose me. And I won't let you take that from me." Victoria's eyes flickered with something dangerous, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "We'll see about that." Clara didn't flinch. She had fought for everything she had, and she wasn't going to let Victoria tear it away from her now. "I'm not afraid of you," Clara said, her voice firm. "And I'm not afraid of losing Nathan, because he chose me. And I won't let you ruin that." Victoria laughed bitterly, her eyes narrowing. "You're more of a fool than I thought, Clara. You don't know the whole story." "You never will." "I know enough," Clara said, her voice cold. "And I know I won't let you destroy what we've built." Victoria's gaze flickered between Clara and the ranch house, her lips curling in a sneer. "We'll see, won't we?" She spat before turning on her heel and walking away. Clara watched her go, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of Victoria's words, the fear creeping in, but she wouldn't let it control her. She had come too far. Nathan would return soon, and when he did, they would face this together, as they always had. And no one was going to take that from her.